Micah watched the footage, his own bruised face trembling as he stood before Whitmore. Comments flooded in. "Kid's a hero, corrupt judge exposed, this is why we fight." But instead of feeling elated, Micah's stomach churned. This was the moment the real retaliation would begin. Whitmore's world revolved around favors, secrets, and leverage. Now Micah was a threat. That night, Miss Carter's house was firebombed. They barely made it out, neighbors witnessing flames licking at the kitchen window. By the time the fire trucks arrived, the house had become a charred skeleton. Micah stood barefoot in the wet grass, watching the smoke twist into the night sky, the flash drive containing Donald's alibi clutched tightly in his hand. "They're sending a message," Miss Carter said, coughing from the lingering smoke. "But they don't know you," Micah said quietly. He had a plan forming, a desire to bring it all down. The judge, the corrupt cops, the DA, the entire system that had destroyed his brother's life and nearly killed him twice, even burning their home to send a warning. It would start with that flash drive. Part 3. Micah didn't sleep that night. He sat on the curb across from Miss Carter's devastated home, clutching the flash drive tightly. Each ache in his ribs, each burn in his throat from the smoke was overshadowed by the fire within him. By dawn, he was gone. He didn't tell Miss Carter where he was headed. She would have tried to stop him. Or worse, she would have wanted to help. And Micah couldn't risk another casualty. He had one mission now, to expose them all. His first stop was a rundown internet cafe downtown, the kind of place that blended into the background. Using cash, he rented a back booth and plugged in the flash drive. Darnell's photo illuminated the screen, time-stamped and geolocated, irrefutable proof. His brother had been at a birthday party across town when the shooting occurred. The metadata checked out. The original file hadn't been altered. He uploaded it to a secure server and sent it to every news outlet with a subject line that burned with urgency. "Exonerate my brother or prove you're complicit." But that was just the beginning. Micah had spent months immersing himself in legal databases, open records laws, and whistleblower protections. Now, he wielded them like weapons. He filed a formal complaint with the State Judicial Conduct Board, complete with footage of Judge Whitmore mocking him, leaked audio of prosecutors laughing about exploiting the Rivers case, and a notarized affidavit from a former bailiff who overheard the DA state it was better to have an innocent black kid behind bars than a guilty one with a vendetta. He prepared a federal civil rights lawsuit against the officers who had assaulted him, attaching injury photos, hospital reports, and timestamps from the firebombing. Micah wasn't alone in this fight. The hashtags had ignited a movement. Civil rights lawyers reached out, law students offered research support, and a former FBI agent who once investigated local corruption shared sealed documents revealing years' worth of dubious rulings under Whitmore's watch. Part 1. Micah Rivers stood in the oppressive heat of the courtroom, sweat pooling under his collar. His fists were clenched at his sides as he struggled to suppress his trembling. The thrift store suit hung loosely on his slender frame. The tie was borrowed and his shoes scuffed from years of wear. On the bench sat Judge Raymond Harland, a hulking figure, exuding cruelty and smirking as if he had already penned the final chapter of this story. He had. Micah's brother, Devin Rivers, had just been handed a life sentence without parole for a crime he didn't commit, and the all-white jury had laughed as if it were a joke. The gavel slammed down with finality, and Harlan's voice echoed throughout the chamber. Life. No appeal. Case closed. Laughter rippled again from the jury box, a low, mocking sound that twisted like a knife in Micah's gut. No one knew that he had spent the last 3 years buried in legal textbooks, memorizing statutes and procedures by flashlight, while his classmates chased touchdowns and prom dates. No one saw the fierce resolve igniting within him, or how he vowed in that moment that the derisive laughter wouldn't mark the end of this fight. That night, sleep eluded him. The sound of Harlan's contemptuous laughter sliced through his thoughts. His brother was confined within a cell 40 miles outside the city, ensnared by a system that deemed his skin color a verdict. He lay awake, fists clenched beneath the same thin blanket he once shared with Devon. That wrinkled suit hung on a nail in the wall, its presence a constant reminder of the war he needed to wage. At sunrise, Mika sat at the kitchen table with a chipped mug of cold coffee, surrounded by the case files he had taken from the public defender's office. The files were disorganized, stained, and dog-eared, but to Mika, whose memory was a steel trap, they were invaluable. Inconsistencies jumped off the pages. A twitchy gas station cashier had testified that Devon had fired a gun, but the timestamps didn't align. Hidden within Devon's phone was a blurry photo taken at a barbershop 3 miles away, time-stamped just minutes after the alleged robbery. With trembling hands, Mika typed out the appeal on a borrowed laptop. He had only 2 days left within the 30-day window granted by Section 32 of state law. By noon, he printed everything, stuffed it into a manila envelope, donned the wrinkled suit, and walked the 3 blocks to the courthouse. At the clerk's desk, a woman in her mid-50s with a nameplate reading Rondo looked down her nose at him. "Boy," she spat, the word laced with disdain. "Are you a lawyer?" "I'm his brother," Mika replied steadily. "I have the right to file under Section 32, subsection B." Rhonda sneered and shoved the envelope back at him. "We don't take trash from children. Get a real attorney." Mika stood firm. "Ma'am, refusal to accept this violates my due process rights under Article 9. Rhonda's face flushed a dangerous red, but before she could retort, a balding clerk with lazy eyes sauntered over, snatched the envelope, glanced at it, and burst into laughter. "Some black kid thinks he's Perry Mason," he jeered, tossing the envelope into a tray with other forms. "I'll report this," Mika said coldly, "to the state bar." "Go ahead," the clerk smirked. "Nobody cares." But someone did. By that afternoon, Judge Harland had heard about the filing and summoned Mika to an emergency hearing. The message came via a courthouse intern barely older than Mika himself. 4 o'clock, he said. "Harland's pissed." Mika arrived early, the courtroom filled with reporters, lawyers, and courthouse regulars. Devon wasn't there, still locked away, but Mika felt his brother's presence in every breath. When Harland entered, his robe flapping like ominous wings, he fixed his gaze on Mika. "Mr. Rivers, explain this foolishness before I have you removed for contempt." Mika approached the podium. His voice wavered on the first few words but steadied with each sentence. "Your Honor, I'm filing an appeal." Devon's trial was flawed. His counsel didn't challenge the testimony, and he wasn't at the scene. The courthouse, once a fortress of fear, transformed into a battleground for accountability. Protesters flooded the steps daily, and local media coverage escalated to national attention. CNN, MSNBC, even Fox News begrudgingly covered the story, headlining "Youth Legal Prodigy Takes on Corrupt System and Wins." Whitmore's camp retaliated. Anonymous articles labeled Mika a fraud, called him mentally unstable, an imposter, even a gang sympathizer. They attempted to leak a juvenile record that didn't exist, but Mika anticipated their moves. At a live press conference hosted by the Southern Justice League, he approached the podium with a cane under his arm and resolve in his eyes. Cameras zoomed in. Reporters leaned forward. "My name is Mika Rivers," he began, his voice resolute despite the pain. "I am not a lawyer, I am a citizen. I am a brother, and I am tired of waiting for justice." He held the flash drive high. "This contains proof that Darnell Rivers is innocent. The state had this evidence for 8 years. They buried it. They lied. They let an innocent black boy rot in prison because the truth was inconvenient." Gasps reverberated through the crowd, and that same evening, the DA's office released a statement. "We will reopen the case." But it was too late for damage control. Judge Whitmore was suspended pending an ethics investigation, and his bank records were subpoenaed, revealing secret donations from private prison contractors. 2 officers resigned before they could be fired, and Maker's civil rights case moved forward. The FBI initiated a broader inquiry into the Charleston Judicial Circuit, and finally, Darnell was released. The courtroom buzzed with energy, cameras flashing incessantly as Maker stood beside his brother, now 25 and robbed of nearly a decade of life. They embraced in silence, a moment untinted by the world around them. But when the judge offered Maker a nod of recognition, he didn't return it. Instead, he turned toward the crowd. "This isn't victory," he declared. "This is survival. We shouldn't have to prove our humanity by enduring beatings and facing death for it." A silence enveloped the room, followed by a wave of applause. Weeks later, as the media cycle turned and headlines faded, Maker returned to Miss Carter's newly rebuilt home. They sat on the porch, sipping sweet tea. "You did it," she said softly. Maker shook his head. "No, we just made it harder for them to pretend." A gentle breeze rustled through the trees. Somewhere in the distance, sirens wailed, not with menace this time, but with meaning. Maker leaned back in his chair, allowing himself to breathe for the first time in what felt like an eternity. The end. Laughter erupted in the courtroom, but Harland waved his hand to quiet the crowd. "You sound like a boy playing dress-up. Sit down." But Maker didn't sit. He opened his notebook and pointed to a specific line on a court transcript. Page 17, line 42. The prosecution's closing argument had exceeded the court's 8-minute deadline. Rule 6.3 stated that any violation voided the verdict. He slid the transcript onto the bench. Harland snatched it and read the line. The smirk vanished from his face, and the courtroom fell silent. Maker pressed on. "The law says you have to grant a retrial." Harland's face flushed, a vein pulsing in his neck as he slammed the transcript down, grabbed the gavel, and growled, "Fine, retrial granted. But don't think you've won." The gavel slammed down again, and court was adjourned. As Maker walked out, a haze of disbelief and adrenaline surrounded him, reporters trailing like bloodhounds. He barely registered that he had achieved something monumental. He had cracked a wall. But then he spotted Harland in the courthouse doorway, phone to his ear, a twisted scowl on his face. "Handle the kid," the judge snarled into the phone. Maker's stomach sank. He'd won a battle, but Harland was far from finished. Part 2. The courthouse steps echoed beneath Maker's hurried footsteps when unmarked cruisers screeched around the corner. He barely managed to cover 2 blocks before the sirens wailed, and 2 plainclothes officers, their blue windbreakers flapping, flung their doors open. Maker Rivers barked the taller one, his hand already resting on his weapon. Maker froze, the envelope with a retrial order still tucked under his armpit. "I didn't do anything," he stammered. The shorter cop, burly and red-faced, stepped forward with a smirk. "That's funny. We heard you were impersonating legal counsel and falsifying documents. Judge Whitmore's gonna be real happy." Before Maker could respond, the taller one grabbed him by the shoulder and slammed him onto the hood of the cruiser, his cheek striking the hot metal and knocking the breath from his lungs. "You think this is a game, boy?" The burly cop spat as he twisted Maker's arm behind his back. "I filed an appeal," Maker gasped. "That's my right under state law." The cuffs snapped tight around his wrists as they shoved him into the back seat. One of the officers pulled out a small plastic bag containing what looked like marijuana and waved it in front of him with a grin. "What's this? Yours?" Maker's heart plummeted. "I've never seen that before." "Of course you haven't." The cruiser lurched forward, gravel crunching beneath its tires as they sped away, not toward a precinct, but to an abandoned lot on the industrial edge of town. The moment they'd parked, the burly cop yanked Maker out, dragging him toward a rusted shipping container. "This is what happens when you make trouble for the wrong people," he hissed. Inside the container, the air was stifling. Micah's wrists were shackled to a pipe above his head. The beatings began almost immediately. Punches, boots, a baton slamming against his ribs. The mingled sense of rust and blood mixed with the acrid stench of sweat. "You think you're smarter than the system," the tall one snarled between blows. "Judge Whitmore runs this city. You're just a ghetto genius with a death wish." Eventually, Micah's body went numb, but his mind stayed sharp. He filed away the details. Section 19 of the state Civil Rights Code provided protection against excessive force. Section 7.4 guaranteed his right to report abuse by public officers. 3 days later, they dumped him at the hospital entrance. Broken nose, 2 cracked ribs, split lip. No charges were filed. No arrest record existed. Just a sinister warning: stay down. But Micah didn't. He limped back to Miss Carter's house, his old social worker and now his unofficial guardian. She looked at him with horror. "Jesus Christ, Micah," she whispered. "They tried to kill you." "They tried to scare me," he corrected, collapsing onto her couch. As she tended to his wound silently, he knew this would not be over. That night, while he lay on her pull-out bed with a frozen bag of peas pressed against his ribs, the TV blared with breaking news. Protests were emerging outside the courthouse. A local journalist had picked up Micah's story after footage of Judge Whitmore mocking him had been leaked by an anonymous court clerk. The video went viral, with the hashtags #RetroAlforivers and Justice for Micah trending everywhere.